Hi, this is Kelly, and welcome to my Living with Food Addiction journal. That's the title of it today, anyway. I just got back from a run and it felt really good. It was like 55 degrees outside and it was glorious. The sun was still out at like 4:30 when I left because I wanted to wait till like the peak temperature for the day. Anyway, so that was a lot of fun. Just getting ready for dinner. I did want to add that so I've been doing my doing my whole food plant based, no oil, no salt kind of way of eating for another week. So, but I have not gotten on the scale, and I am going to talk about like delaying gratification and how that ties in with getting on the scale, and how some of the things that we can learn through the process of dealing with food addiction can play into other areas of our life, or how anyway. But I decided that rather than talking about that tonight, I was going to take a step back and just talk about food addiction as a concept itself. Because there may be people who don't believe that food addiction is real, or that they're not a food addict. And so then that could still sort of benefit from the ideas that I'm sharing, but are sort of trapped behind this semantic wall or something. So a lot of I've seen this quite often in the whole food plant-based community, where people will argue that food addiction is not a real thing, that what we consider to be food addiction is really our body behaving exactly like it was biologically programmed to behave. So if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, in times of scarcity, the people who sought out the high calorie dense, high fat foods and ate as much as they could eat of it when it was available and put fat stores on their body survived longer than the people who didn't. And so that in times, when there wasn't any food, then they had those fat stores to live off of. So we were designed to do that. The difference between now and then is that, one, scarcity just isn't a thing anymore for most of us. And so we eat a lot of the high fat foods, we add fat to our body, and then there's never a time of scarcity where we use those stores to live off of. And so we just keep piling more fat on top of more fat. And that has its own, fat itself has its own relationship to health and mobility and other issues. The second issue is that the high calorie dense foods that exist now are often ones that have sort of been created in a lab and manufactured in a factory, and they were never the types of things that our bodies were designed to survive on or derive any kind of sustenance from. So when we're eating heavily processed, high fat, high sugar foods, and we're eating them in excess, and not only are we adding fat on that will never end up burning, but they're also things that our body doesn't appreciate. Like, we don't function well on those types of things because they're not natural to like the plant world or whatever world, animal world. And so therefore we're dying of lifestyle related or food related illnesses like cancers, hypertension, high blood pressure, dementia, all of these different diseases that we're getting as a result of the way that we're eating. So the argument then is that you just stop eating those foods and you won't crave them anymore, and you'll be healthy because your body clearly is functioning the way that it's supposed to be functioning. You're just eating the wrong foods. So eat the right foods and you'll be fine. Problem solved. So, then I think, well, in my experience, addiction has been sort of twofold. There's this physical reaction component where I either drink something and I can't stop drinking it, or I eat something and I can't stop eating it. But there's also a mental obsession that goes along with it. So afterward, I crave it and I want it more and more and more and more. And I have these obsessive thoughts spinning around in my head until I finally give in to them and indulge in whatever it is that my brain is telling me that I need. And so the food addiction is not real. People would argue that that's an entirely different thing, that's actually, a lack of, well, first of all, the cravings themselves is part of the food. So like when there are certain foods that cause you to physically crave them afterwards, and that's not necessarily an addictive response, it's just a property of those particular foods. And so I would say, well, what about relapse then? How does that explain if you've gone weeks or even months of abstaining from these processed foods? Why do people still relapse after years of abstinence, or even months of abstinence or weeks of abstinence, long after the physical aspect of it should be out of your body? And so there they would argue that that is a different thing going on, and that is an inability to sort of deal with life stressors, so poor coping skills. And if you just learn better coping skills, you wouldn't use something like food to get past it. So, fair enough. The way that I look at that is that if your goal is to never eat any of those foods ever again, and then completely change the way that you deal with life, the way that you process, information and your relationships, and deal with what life throws at you, like how is that different from like AA or Overeaters Are Not Anonymous? I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, they're both saying you need to completely abstain and then start looking at your own personal issues that drive you to want to escape life and work on those things. So one of them just happens to say it's an addiction, and the other people don't say it's an addiction, but they're both saying the solution is exactly the same solution. So I don't really care. I personally, I call it an addiction because it sort of, when I don't think of it that way, when I think of it like, well, I just need this, to like feel better about myself or whatever, it kind of starts to send my mind down this road that maybe I'll get to a point in my life where I'll be able to have some of these things in smaller quantities, in unharmful quantities. And like alcohol, I just don't believe that that's ever going to happen. And the problem is that if I'm right that that's never going to happen, and so I abstain from these foods for the rest of my life, or I abstain from alcohol for the rest of my life, no harm will come to me from doing that. But if if I say, okay, well, maybe I can have a little bit of alcohol now that it's been 14 years, or I can have a little bit of ice cream now that it's been a year or whatever, and I'm wrong, then I can get sent down an addictive spiral that I'll never come back from, or potentially never come back from. I mean, I've known people who, fell off the wagon that I knew who were alcoholics, and they, one woman that I know got really drunk, went out with her best friend, got into a big fight with her best friend. Her friend jumped out of the car, and she accidentally ran over her friend and killed her. And now she's in prison, and she'll have to live with that for the rest of her life. I know somebody else who got drunk and thought it would be funny to hop on their friend's scooter, hopped on the scooter, cruised down the road, ran into a tree, and died instantly. So sometimes, you don't get another chance. And therefore, it's just kind of this reminder that if there's any way that eating another gelato in Italy is going to send me down a road that's going to end up leading to breast cancer or hypertension, diabetes, whatever, it's like there's no harm from going the rest of my life without gelato, but there potentially is harm if I think that I can now eat it in moderation. So for me, calling it an addiction keeps it in the forefront of my mind that this is potentially very dangerous, has very negative consequences. If I just think of it as like, oh, my body's functioning exactly like it's supposed to, I just need to abstain from these foods and go to counseling or whatever, I have the type of mind that will start to come back and go, well, if my body's functioning normally and it's not me, then maybe, what I'm saying? So if the word addict or addiction really, really bothers you, just don't use it. You don't have to think of yourself as an addict unless it's useful. For me, I think it's useful. So that's why I say it. And it also points me in a direction that I have used before with something that I believe I was addicted to, that I've been successful in managing. And so for that reason, I also, I feel that it's helpful. So anyway, that, and that's another thing too. Like if a lot of times people get wrangled over the term powerless. I'm powerless over alcohol. I'm powerless over food. And really, that in that sense, it only means that you're powerless over alcohol, over how like your body reacts to alcohol. So once you've had it to drink, you can't control sort of the reaction that your body has. So think of it as if you were allergic to penicillin. No amount of therapy, no amount of meditation or yoga or prayer or whatever is going to make your body respond to penicillin any differently. You're going to be allergic to penicillin, period. Likewise, a lot of people will say that alcoholism is an allergy, that alcoholics are allergic to alcohol. And so you basically just accept it and move forward and don't get like hung up on this idea of powerlessness. But so likewise, I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole there. But my point is that if you find yourself getting like your hackles up over a term that somebody's using, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to shut your ears and abandon anything that person might have to say, and rather just say, let's just let these terms go. Let's not get bound up by semantics, and just, don't use that word if that word bothers you. So anyway, that's it for tonight, and I am going to move on with the topic of dealing with sort of the obsessive thinking in my next video, I think. Anyway, keep coming back.